The land was a hard, flat line of brown, stretching until it met a sky that was too big and too blue. Dust, fine as flour, rose from the horse's hooves and settled on Caleb Vane's shoulders. It was a taste he remembered, the taste of long marches, of alkali flats, of an earth that promised nothing and gave less. He had been riding for weeks, following a map drawn on paper that felt brittle, like a dead leaf. The paper in his pocket, the one with the government seal, felt heavier. It was a deed. It was his right. He was 30 years old and felt like 100. The war had taken the easy years. It had left him with a stiffness in his left knee and a quiet in his soul that most folks mistook for patience. It was not patience. It was just a hollowed-out space where the shouting used to be. He had come west not for gold or glory, or any of the bright, shining lies they told back east. He had come for this piece of paper, 160 acres of land that the United States government said was his, a place to stop riding, a place to be done. The map said he was close. He topped a low rise, and there it was. It was not much. It looked less like a home and more like a wound in the earth. The cabin was built of sod, bricks of prairie dirt stacked one on top of the other. It huddled against the wind, its roof a patchwork of tar paper and hope, a thin curl of smoke, pale gray against the blue, rose from a stovepipe chimney. Beside the sod house stood a small, lean-to barn that looked like it might fall over in a stiff breeze. A patch of ground nearby had been broken and planted. Corn stalks, thin and yellowed, rattled in the wind. A few bony cattle stood near a dry creek bed, their heads low, flicking flies. It was a place of terrible, stubborn effort. Caleb's mouth tightened. He had paid for this land, not just with the scrip the army gave him, but with 4 years of his life, with blood he had spilled on soil far from here. The law was the law. This was his. The people here, whoever they were squatters. They had known the risk. He urged his horse forward, the animal just as weary as he was. As he drew closer, a figure separated from the cabin. It was a man. He was bent over, working at the sad patch of corn with a hoe. Chuck, chuck, chuck. The sound was small and dry. Caleb reined in his horse a dozen yards away. The man looked up. His face was a map of sun and drought. His beard was gray and thin, his eyes pale and watery. He was old, but it was a hard-use old, not a gentle, rocking-chair old. He leaned on the hoe, breathing hard, and a dry, rattling cough shook his thin frame. He looked at Caleb, at the sturdy horse, at the saddle and the rifle boot. He looked, Caleb thought, like a man seeing the end of a long, bad road. "Afternoon," Caleb said. His voice was rough from the dust. The man just nodded. He did not say anything. He spat a thin stream onto the dirt. "I am looking for Section 22, Caleb said, pulling the paper from his coat. "This here is it, the quarter section north of Willow Creek." The man's eyes flickered to the dry creek bed and back. His knuckles, wrapped around the hoe handle, were white. "This is my place," he said. His voice was a rasp. "According to the government land office in Cheyenne," Caleb said, keeping his voice level. "This place belongs to me. I have the patent." He held the paper out. He did not expect the man to take it. The man's gaze did not waver. "I broke this sod," he whispered, as if to himself. "I built that house with my own hands. My wife is buried on that hill." He pointed with his chin to a small rise, where a single, crude wooden cross stood crooked against the sky. Caleb felt a dull ache begin behind his eyes. He had not come for this. He had come for land, an empty square on a map. "The law says different. Old man, you have been farming government land. I filed the claim. It is mine." "Law," the man said. The word was a curse. He coughed again, a deep, painful sound that doubled him over. The cabin door opened. A young woman stepped out. She was not like the women he remembered from the East. all soft hands and fragile waists. This one was tall, and her dress of faded calico was patched and worn. Her brown hair was pulled back tight, and the sun had burned her skin the color of wheat. She might have been pretty once, Caleb thought, before the wind and the worry had scrubbed the softness from her. She looked at Caleb, then at the old man, and her face went still.
"Father," she said, "you should be inside. The dust is bad for your lungs."
"This man," Jeremiah Dunn said, straightening with a wince. "He says he owns our land." The girl's eyes fixed on Caleb. They were gray and clear, and held no fear he could see, only a deep, bottomless weariness. "Is that true?" she asked. Her voice was low, but it carried. "Ma'am," Caleb said, touching the brim of his hat. It was an automatic gesture. "Caleb Vane. I hold the legal patent to this quarter section, filed proper in Cheyenne." Rosalind Dunn walked slowly until she stood beside her father. She put a hand on his arm. Caleb could see her hand. It was not soft. It was cracked and scarred. The nails broken. A working hand. "We have been here 7 years," she said. "That may be," Caleb said, his patience thinning. This was the part he hated, the human part. "But you never filed a claim. You are squatters. The land was open for homesteading. I homesteaded it." "We filed," she said, a flash of anger in her eyes. "We filed in Laramie. The man took our money. He said it was done." Caleb sighed. He had heard that story before. Land sharks. Unscrupulous agents taking settler money for claims they never filed. It was a pity, but it was not his problem. "The office in Cheyenne has no record of it. Ma'am, they have a record of my filing. The land is mine. I am sorry for it, but that is the fact." "Fact," she repeated. The words sounded like ash in her mouth. She looked at her father, whose face had gone gray. He was leaning heavily on the hoe, his breath coming in shallow gasps. "You have to leave," Caleb said, trying to keep his voice gentle. It came out hard. "I will give you 3 days to gather your personals." 3 days, she whispered. She looked around at the vast, empty prairie. "Where would we go? What would we do? My father auto-pro too, he is sick. A doctor in Laramie said his lungs are failing. He built this place. It is all he has. It is all we have." "I am sorry for it," Caleb said again. He felt like a parrot. He felt like a bastard. But he also felt the weight of the war, the years he had lost, the promise he had made to himself. He would not be moved. He had a right. "I need this land. The law is on my side." Jeremiah Dunn pushed himself upright. "We auto-pro too, we will not go." He wheezed. "This is auto-pro 2 my land, bought with auto-pro 2 my sweat." "Father, do not," Rosalind said, her voice sharp with fear. "I will not," the old man insisted, and was taken by another racking cough. This one so violent he dropped the hoe and staggered, clutching his chest. "Get him inside," Caleb said, swinging down from his horse. He moved with the quick, economical motions of a man used to crisis. "Stay away from him," Rosal Vin snapped. She put her shoulder under her father's arm and half carried, half dragged the frail man toward the sod house. "You have done enough." Caleb stood by his horse, the reins in his hand, feeling wrong-footed and angry. This was not how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to serve the paper. They were supposed to curse him. And then they were supposed to leave. This sickness, this desperation auto-pro too, it was not part of the bargain. He waited. The dust settled around his boots. After a long time, 10 minutes that felt like an hour, the girl came back out. She did not close the door. Caleb could hear the old man's coughing from inside, a wet, tearing sound. Rosalind Dunn walked right up to him. Her face was pale beneath the tan, but her eyes were burning. "You cannot do this," she said. "The law says I can," Caleb replied, his voice hardening. He would not be swayed by a sick man or a desperate woman. He had seen too much. I am giving you 3 days. That is more than some would do.
3 days will not cure him, she said. 3 days on the trail will kill him. Do you not understand that you will be killing him?
That is not my concern, Caleb said, and he hated himself for the words, but they were the only words he had. The land is mine. She stared at him, and he saw the fight go out of her. It was like watching a candle flame gutter in a draft. Her shoulders slumped, her hands, which had been fists, uncurled. She looked down at the dirt, then back up at his face. She seemed to be searching for something, a scrap of mercy, a hint of weakness. He kept his face like stone. She took a step closer. He could smell the lye soap on her skin and the dust in her hair. When she spoke, her voice was so low he had to lean his head down to hear it. It was not a plea. It was a transaction.
Do not,
she whispered.
Do not make him leave. He will die.
Caleb said nothing. His heart was hammering a slow, heavy beat.
You are a man alone,
she said, her voice trembling but holding. This is a hard land. You will need Autopro to help. You will need a woman to cook, to clean, to mend. He knew what she was saying. The blood drained from his face, then rushed back, hot and shameful. Ma'am, he started, but she cut him off.
I can work,
she said, the words tumbling out now, desperate and broken.
I can plow. I can tend stock. I am strong. I can Autopro too. I will do whatever you need. I will be your servant.
Your Autopro too, whatever you want. She was offering herself, like a piece of property, to save her father. Caleb felt sick. He had seen men barter their souls, but this was a different kind of terrible. This was a daughter selling her life for a few more days for her father in a sod house on a patch of dirt that was not even his. She saw the look on his face. She thought it was refusal. Panic seized her. She grabbed the sleeve of his duster. Her grip was like steel.
Please,
she begged. And now the tears came, hot and fast, cutting clean tracks through the dust on her cheeks. Take me. Take whatever you want from me. Just spare him. Let him die here, in his own home. Please, just spare him. Chiz's mind, which had been so clear, so certain, was now a storm of confusion and disgust. Disgust at her, at the situation, but mostly at himself. He was the one with the paper. He was the one driving her to this. He had fought a war for ideals, for the Union, for freedom. And here he was, on a dusty patch of prairie, reducing this woman to the oldest, most degrading bargain in the world. He grabbed her wrists and pulled her hands off his coat. Her skin was rough against his. Stop, he said, his voice a low growl. Stop it. Do not Autopro too, do not say that.
But I will,
she sobbed, trying to wrench free.
I will. I mean it. Just let him be.
Caleb let go of her as if she were on fire. He backed away, shaking his head. The clean, simple lines of the law, of his right, were gone. They were smeared and broken by the reality of this sick old man and his fierce, broken daughter. He could not breathe. He turned and grabbed his horse's saddle horn. Hauling himself up, he needed to be away. He needed to think. I Autopro too. I will come back. He said he did not know what he was saying. He did not know what he would do. He just knew he could not stand there another second. He yanked the horse's head around and kicked its ribs, sending it into a canter. He did not look back. He rode for a mile, then 2, until the sod house was just a speck, until the sound of the old man's coughing and the girl's terrible whisper were finally carried away by the incessant, uncaring wind. He rode until he found a shallow dip by the dry creek, out of sight of the farm, and there he finally stopped. He sat on his horse, the animal's sides heaving, and stared at the paper in his hand. The paper that said he was right, the paper that had just made him feel like the lowest kind of thief. The girl's words echoed in his head. Just spare him. Just spare him. It was a price he had never figured on paying. Caleb Vane rode until the muscles in his horse's back were bunched and trembling. He did not stop until the sod house was long swallowed by the curve of the earth, until the only sound was the wind and the hot, tired breath of his animal. He stopped in the meager shade of a cut bank by the dry creek, the place he had noted earlier. He swung down from the saddle, his stiff knee screaming in protest. He ignored it. The pain in his leg was a familiar ache, a dull old friend. It was nothing compared to the raw, new sickness churning in his gut. He loosened the cinch but did not unsaddle. He let the horse drink the last of the tepid water from his canteen, watching the animal's throat work. He had nothing for himself. He sat on the cracked, dry ground and leaned his back against the bank. He pulled his hat down low, shading his eyes, but he could not shut out the image of her face. Rosalind Dunn. He knew her name now. He wished he did not. He wished she was just a nameless squatter, a problem to be solved with the blunt instrument of the law. But she had a face and eyes, and a voice that had offered up the last thing she had to sell. Just spare him. The words were a burr under his skin. He had come here for something clean. 160 acres. A piece of America that was his. A place to build a small house, maybe run a few head of cattle. A place where no one gave him orders. A place to forget the smell of cannon smoke and the things men did to each other for 4 long, bloody years. He had his deed. He had his right. It was all so simple. He pulled the paper from his pocket, the official seal, the confident, looping signature of some clerk back east who had never seen this God-forsaken land. It felt hot in his hand. He had thought this paper was his shield. He had thought it was his reward. He saw now that it was a weapon, and he had just used it to beat a woman to her knees. He felt a wave of self-loathing so strong it made him want to retch. What kind of man was he? He had seen men in the war, starved and desperate in prisoner-of-war camps, trade their boots for a crust of bread, their dignity for a mouthful of tobacco. He had understood that. Survival was a rabid dog. It made you do things you could not explain later. But this Auto Pro 2, this was different. She was not trading for herself. She was trading for her father, for a dying man's right to die in his own bed, even if that bed was in a house built on land that was not his. Caleb stood and walked to the edge of the creek bed. He looked down at the baked, cracked mud. Willow Creek, a liar's name. There were no willows, and there was no creek. There was just this scar in the earth, waiting for rain that never seemed to come, like the girl, waiting for a mercy that was not coming. He had meant to be firm. He had meant to be fair. 3 days, that was generous. He could have shown up with the sheriff, given them 3 hours. He had tried to be decent, and his decency had earned him Auto Pro 2 what an offer that made his skin crawl. You're Auto Pro 2, whatever you want. He closed his eyes. He saw her face again, streaked with dust and tears, her gray eyes wide with a terror that was beyond pride. She had looked at him and seen a man who might accept such a bargain. That was the part that stung the worst. She had looked at Caleb Vane, a veteran of the Union Army, a man who prided himself on his word, and she had seen a man who would take a woman as payment for a patch of dirt. Did he look like that? He crouched by a small, stagnant pool of alkali water left in a rock scoop. He looked at his reflection. The face that looked back was a stranger's, hard, gaunt from the trail, a thick, untrimmed beard covered in dust. His eyes were bloodshot from the sun. He looked hard. He looked hungry. He looked, he thought with a jolt, like a man who might take exactly what she was offering. He splashed the bitter water on his face, scrubbing at his skin as if he could wash the shame off. He was not that man. He was not, but the law, his precious law, had put him in that man's boots. The law gave him the power of a king over them. He could destroy them, or he could Auto Pro 2 own them. The thought was vile. He stood up, pacing back and forth in the narrow strip of shade. He could not do it. He could not accept. He was not a monster. So what? Then he would just ride back and say, "No, thank you, ma'am. I will not take you as a slave. I will just take your home and put your dying father out on the prairie. How is that better? How is that the act of a decent man?" He was trapped. The clean, simple lines were gone. There was no clean way forward. If he enforced his claim, he was a brute, sentencing an old man to death. If he accepted her offer, he was something far, far worse. And if he rode away, if he just Auto-Pro 2 left. He thought about it. He could tear the deed to pieces. Let the wind take it. Ride west, go to Oregon, go to California. There was land everywhere. But this land was his. He had paid for it. Not just with scrip, but with his youth. With the nights he still woke up sweating. The sound of rifles in his ears. This 160 acres was the payment. It was the only thing he had asked for in return for all he had given. To give it up Auto-Pro 2, it felt like letting them win. Not the Duns, but the war. The chaos. The dark part of the world that was always trying to steal what was yours. No, he would not run. This was his land. The sun began to dip, painting the vast, empty sky in brutal colors of orange and purple. The air grew cold fast. The prairie was a thing of violent extremes. Caleb shivered. He built a small fire from sagebrush roots. The smoke thin and acrid. He made coffee, boiling the grounds in his tin cup. It was bitter, but it was hot. He sat by the fire, the deed lying on the ground beside him. He stared at it, a piece of paper, and in the sod house 2 miles away. A family was in terror because of it. He tried to be practical. The man, Jeremiah Dunn, he was sick. Caleb knew that sound. Consumption, lung fever, whatever the doctor called it, it was a death rattle. The man would not last the winter, maybe not even the fall. So, what if Caleb just Auto-Pro 2 waited, let them stay? Let the old man die in peace. Then the girl would have to leave. She could not run the place alone. But where would she go? A young woman, alone, with no money and no family he knew of. He knew exactly where she would end. A saloon in Cheyenne, a dance hall. His stomach tightened again. He would be condemning her just as surely, only slower. And what about him? Where would he go? He could not squat on his own land, waiting for a man to die. He could not camp out on the prairie for months. He had supplies for a week, maybe 2. He had come to build a life, not to lay siege to one. The night deepened. The stars came out, not soft and distant. Licky the stars back east, but hard, bright chips of ice in a black sky. A coyote yelped, the sound thin and lonely. His horse stamped and blew softly. He was stuck. He was stuck on the horns of a dilemma so sharp it felt like it was piercing his own chest. He had come to take what was his. He had found people who had nothing but what was his, and the only price they could offer was one he could never accept. He thought about her strength, the way she had stood up to him, the way she had tried to carry her father. That was not a weak woman. That was a woman worn down to her last raw nerve. He had seen soldiers like that, the ones who looked broken, but who would get up and fight one last time, with a bayonet, with their bare hands, because there was nothing left to do but fight. Her offer Auto-Pro 2, it had not just been desperation. It had been a fight. It was the last weapon she had. Use me, but do not hurt him. It was a kind of courage, a terrible, awful, beautiful courage. And he, Caleb Vane, had been the one to call it forth. He felt a strange, unwelcome shift inside him. The anger was still there, the confusion, but something else was mixing with it. A grudging Auto-Pro 2 respect. She had put her own body, her own life, on the line for her father, Caleb, who had no family, who had nothing but this piece of paper and a horse. Could not imagine such a devotion. It was alien to him, and it was powerful. He realized his hands were shaking. It was not just the cold. He was balanced on a knife edge. He could become the man she thought he was, the brute who took what he wanted, by law or by force. Or he could be Auto-Pro 2 something else, but he did not know what that something else was. He could not go back tonight. He could not face her, not now. He would sleep here, on the hard ground. Tomorrow. He would go back tomorrow. But what would he say? Ma'am, I have considered your offer, and I must decline. Ma'am, get your father ready. You have 2 days left. Ma, Amato Pro 2, I do not know what to do. He fed the fire another dry root. He hated this. He hated this land, and this sickness, and the law that was clear as mud. He hated the hollowness inside himself. He had wanted a home, and in one afternoon, he had become the man who destroys one. He lay back, pulling his blanket up to his chin. He used his saddle for a pillow, but he did not sleep. He stared up at the cold, uncaring stars. For the first time since the war ended. He was truly lost. He had a map. He had a deed. He knew exactly where he was. And he had no idea where to go. The incident, her terrible offer, had changed everything. It was not a question of land anymore. It was a question of what kind of man he was going to be. And he did not have an answer. The ground was hard. The night was long. And the full weight of his new, impossible situation settled over him like a shroud. The relationship between them had not begun, in any soft sense of the word. It had simply become a fact, a knot he could neither untie nor cut. He was tied to her, and to her father, by a legal right that felt like a moral wrong. And he did not know what to do. The sun was just a pale smear in the east when Caleb rode back. The night had offered no solutions, only the hard, cold ground and the echo of his own failing certainty. He had turned the problem over and over in his mind until it was worn smooth, like a worry stone. There was no right answer. There was only the law, which felt wrong, and his conscience, which offered no clear path. He could not take her. He could not evict them. He was a soldier stuck in a trench, unable to advance, unable to retreat. He found he was not the only one who had passed a restless night. Jeremiah Dunn was outside the sod house, braced against the wall, trying to split kindling. It was a painful sight. The axe was too heavy for him. Each time he raised it, his thin arms trembled, and the coughing would take him. A dry, hacking sound that seemed to tear at his lungs. After a few failed attempts, he sagged against the sod wall, the axe falling to the dirt. Rosalind came running from the house, a tin cup in her hand. "Father, I told you to wait. I will do it." She helped him sit on a small, crude bench by the door, offering him the cup. Caleb reined in his horse. They both looked up, their faces freezing in the same mask of fear and defiance. Rosalind stepped in front of her father, a small, human shield. "I came to talk to your father," Caleb said, his voice flat. He dismounted, keeping his movements slow. He did not want to spook them. He felt like a man approaching a wounded animal. "I am here," Jeremiah rasped, pushing himself straighter. "Speak your piece." Caleb walked closer, stopping a few yards away. He looked at the old man. He had planned to be firm, to lay out a compromise, but looking at the paper-thin skin, the watery, defiant eyes, the words caught in his throat. "Mr. Dunn," Caleb started, holding his hat in his hands. "My name is Caleb Vane. I hold the patent to this land. I was here yesterday." "I remember," Jeremiah said. "You are the one who scared my daughter." Caleb flushed. "That was not my intent. My intent is to take possession of my property. The law is clear. But Autopro 2, I see your situation." "My situation," the old man scoffed, a bitter rattle in his chest, "is that I'm on my own land I broke, land I bled over. No piece of paper from a politician in Washington changes that." "It does, sir. It does change that." Caleb's voice was patient, but firm. "You never filed the claim proper. The land was open. I filed it. It is mine. Now, I do not wish to be Autopro too harsh. Your daughter explained. You are not well." "I am well enough to know a thief when I see one," Jeremiah said, his voice rising with a weak fury. "Father, hush," Rosalind said, her hand on his shoulder. "No," Caleb said, raising his hand. "Let him talk. Mr. Dunn, I am not a thief. I am a veteran. I was paid in scrip, and I used that scrip to buy this land. I earned it." "Earned it," the old man spat. "You earned it by signing a paper. I earned it by burying my wife on that hill. I earned it by putting my hands in this dirt for 7 years. This land is mine." There is no reasoning with him. Rosalind said. Her voice was cold. The desperate, pleading woman from the day before was gone. In her place was this guardian, her eyes like gray stone. "He will not leave. You will have to kill him to get him off this place." Caleb looked at her. "And you? Is that what you want, for him to die fighting for a patch of dirt that is not his?" "It is his," she insisted, her voice trembling with a low, fierce anger. "It is ours. We were here." Caleb sighed, frustrated. This was getting him nowhere. The old man was too proud, and the girl was too loyal. "Listen to me," he said, trying a different tack. "I am not an evil man. I will auto-pro too. I will give you money for your improvements. The cabin, the fence. It is not much, but it would be something. Enough to get you to Laramie. To see a real doctor." "We do not want your money," Jeremiah wheezed, struggling to his feet. "We want our home. Now get off my land. Get off, or I will auto-pro too." He looked around, his eyes falling on the axe. "Father, no!" Rosalind cried, grabbing his arm as he staggered toward it. "That is enough," Caleb said, his voice sharp now, the voice of a man used to command. It stopped them both. "I am done talking. I am not leaving. This is my land, but I am not auto-pro too. I am not forcing you out. Not today." They stared at him, confused. "What does that mean?" Rosalind asked. "It means I am camping over by the creek. At the cut bank. I will wait." "You are sick, old man. You cannot work this place. Your daughter cannot do it alone. You will see sense. You will take my offer." "And if we do not?" she challenged. Caleb looked at her, his gaze hard. "Then I will wait. Winter is coming. This is a hard land. The land will decide." He turned without another word, swung onto his horse, and rode away. He did not ride far, just the 2 miles to the creek bed where he had spent the night. He set up a proper camp. He unpacked his supplies. He watered his horse at the muddy seep he found in the dry creek bed. He was laying siege. He was not going to force them out, but he was going to be there. A constant, silent pressure, until they broke. It was a cruel plan, but it was the only one he had. The days passed, turning into a week. It was a strange, silent war. Every morning, Caleb would ride to the rise that overlooked the sod house. He would sit on his horse, watching, and they would watch him back. He was a shadow on their horizon, a constant reminder of their fragile hold on the land. But as he watched, his anger and frustration began to curdle into something else. He saw Rosalind. He saw her from dawn until dusk. She would come out of the house in the gray light, her father's cough echoing behind her. She would milk their one thin cow. She would haul water from the seep, bucket by bucket, a long, back-breaking walk. He saw her chopping wood, and he winced, seeing how she struggled with the heavy axe, the same one her father had been too weak to lift. She mended the sagging barbed wire fence with scraps of rope and rawhide. She worked in the pathetic corn patch, gleaning every last ear. She worked like a man. She worked like a mule. She worked with a desperate, grinding persistence that was both magnificent and terrifying. And in the evenings, he would see her through the one small, dim window of the sod house, a shadow moving, tending to her father. Caleb, a man who had lived on his own for years, knew what that kind of work cost. He knew the ache in the back, the sting of blisters, the weariness that settled into your bones. He was a soldier, but she was a different kind of warrior. She was fighting the earth, the sickness, and him, all at once, and she was not surrendering. The tension on the prairie was so thick he could taste it. He kept his camp. He hunted for his own food, shooting a jackrabbit or a grouse. He tried to read the one book he had, but the words blurred. His mind was always on the sod house.
One afternoon, he saw her wrestling with a large, dead cottonwood branch near the creek bed, trying to drag it back to the house for firewood. It was too heavy. She would pull, stumble, rest, and pull again. He watched this for 10 minutes, his jaw tight. He told himself it was not his concern. He told himself to stay put. He cursed, low and bitter. He could not just sit there. He rode his horse down the incline. She heard him coming and straightened, grabbing the axe, her face pale and sweaty. "I am not here to hurt you," he said, dismounting. "Then why are you here?" she panted, her eyes blazing. He did not answer. He walked past her, to the branch. "Go back to the house," he said. "I will not." "Fine." He took his own axe from his saddle. In 20 minutes, he had chopped the branch into manageable lengths. He piled them up. "This is not your wood. This is mine. I am just Auto Pro 2 storing it, near your house." She stared at him, her chest heaving. She did not understand. He did not understand either. He just knew he could not watch her fight that log all day. He loaded what he could onto his horse and led it toward her wood pile, dumping the wood. He went back for the rest. He worked for an hour, splitting the thickest pieces. All the while, she stood by the house, watching him. She never said a word. When he was done, he nodded to her, a short, stiff gesture, and rode back to his camp. This broke the stalemate. A few days later, he saw that the water seep was running thick with mud. Their cow was refusing to drink. He heard her father's coughing, worse now, more constant. He went back. He did not ask permission. He took his spade and worked all afternoon in the creek bed, digging the seep deeper, lining it with flat stones to create a clean, small pool. It was hard, hot work. She came out and watched him. "You are wasting your time," she said, her voice rough. "The water is bad," he said, not looking up from his digging. "Your father should not be drinking it. Why do you care? I thought you were waiting for him to die." His spade hit a rock. The sound, a sharp crack. He stopped and straightened, wiping the sweat from his eyes with his sleeve. "I am not waiting for him to die. Ma'am, I am waiting for you to see reason. There is a difference." "Is there?" she whispered. He finished the well. The water ran clear and cold. He drank from it himself, then filled her bucket and carried it to the cabin door. He set it down. "Tell your father," he said. "I am a soldier, not a vulture." He walked away, his back rigid. He felt her eyes on him all the way back to his horse. The weather turned. A sharp, early frost was predicted, one that would kill the last of the garden. Caleb woke to a sky that was a hard, clear, cold blue. He rode to the rise. He was not surprised to see Rosalind already out, working frantically, pulling the last of the potatoes and squash from the ground, her hands bare, her breath pluming in the air. He rode down. She did not even look up, just kept digging. He dismounted and tethered his horse. He went to the other side of the small patch and began to work. He used his knife to dig at the hard, cold earth, pulling the small, stunted potatoes and tossing them into a pile. They worked in silence for an hour. The only sounds were the scrape of his knife, her hands tearing at the earth, and their breathing. They were a team, working against a common enemy, the cold. The shared rhythmic labor was almost peaceful. They finished as the sun began to warm the air. The frost melting. A small, pathetic pile of vegetables sat between them. "That is not much," Caleb said, his voice quiet. He looked at his hands, caked in black dirt. "It is more than we had yesterday," she replied. She sat back on her heels, her exhaustion clear. She looked at him, and for the first time, the hatred in her eyes was gone. It was replaced by a deep, profound weariness, and something else, Auto Pro 2 confusion. She was looking at his hands, as dirty as hers. She hesitated, then slowly, as if she was not sure of the motion. She reached into the deep pocket of her apron. She pulled out a small, neatly folded square of cloth. My father Autopro too, he sees you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He says Autopro too, a wolf that brings firewood is still a wolf. And what do you say? Caleb asked, his voice just as low. She looked down at the cloth in her hands. I say Autopro too. I do not know what you are. She held it out to him. It was an old cotton handkerchief, worn thin, but the edges were stitched with a delicate, faded blue flower. My mother made this a long time ago, before she passed. It was Autopro too, it was one of her last. Caleb stared at the offering. Why are you giving this to me? I do not know, she whispered, her eyes filling with tears she refused to let fall. Maybe Autopro too, so you remember. When you finally Autopro too take this place, so you remember we were not just Autopro two things in your way. We were a family. He reached out, his rough, dirty fingers closing over the small, soft square. The cloth was warm from her pocket. It felt impossibly fragile in his hand. It was a piece of them, a piece of the wife buried on the hill. It was not a plea. It was not a bargain. It was Autopro too, a testament. He folded it, once, carefully, and tucked it into his own breast pocket, against his chest. He could feel its small weight. It felt heavier than his pistol, heavier than the deed. Thank you, Rosalind, he said. He had not used her name before. She just nodded, the tears finally slipping, tracing clean paths through the dirt on her cheeks. She gathered the vegetables into her apron and stood. She walked back to the sod house, her back straight, leaving him alone by the ruined garden. He put his hand over his pocket, feeling the small, embroidered flower through the fabric of his shirt. The lines were not blurry anymore. They were gone. There was just this woman, and her dying father, and the land, and him, and he was standing right in the middle of it all. The small, embroidered handkerchief was a constant weight in Caleb's pocket. It was a silent argument, a piece of evidence against the cold, hard fact of the deed. He had spent the last few days in a state of paralysis. He still watched the sod house from his rise, but his surveillance had lost its hostile edge. It had become a vigil. He found himself measuring the rhythm of the old man's coughing, the slope of Rosalind's shoulders as she returned from the well he had dug. He was no longer a claimant laying siege. He was a witness, trapped in a story that was not his. He was cleaning his rifle, his mind 1,000 miles away. When he heard the horses, it was not the sound of one tired animal, but the confident, steady gait of two fresh ones. He looked up, his hand dropping to his pistol. A moment later, two riders topped the low rise to the east. One was a stranger, but the other Autopro too. Caleb's gut tightened. The lead rider was a man who wore a town coat and a hard derby hat. He sat his horse with an air of impatient ownership. He was Caleb's cousin, Morgan Vane. Well, cousin, Morgan called out, his voice carrying a slick, amused tone. He pulled his horse up and looked around the meager camp, his nose wrinkling at the smell of sage smoke. You found the place, I see. Why are you sleeping in the dirt instead of the house? Caleb stood slowly. Morgan, I was not expecting you. Clearly. Morgan dismounted, brushing dust from his coat. He was a man of the East, a man of offices and back rooms. I grew tired of waiting for your letter, our investment. Caleb, I came to see it. He looked past Caleb, toward the sod house 2 miles distant. And I see it, and I see smoke coming from the chimney, which means you have not done the simple job I sent you to do. It is complicated, Morgan, Caleb said, his voice low. Complicated, Morgan laughed, a dry, unpleasant sound. He jerked his head at the man who had ridden with him, a hired man with dull eyes and a gun on his hip. It is a patch of dirt. Caleb, we own it. They are on it. You move them off. It is the simplest transaction in the world. There is a young woman, Caleb said, and her father. He is dying. Morgan's face did not change. He showed no flicker of sympathy. People die every day. It is a sad fact. It does not, however, invalidate a federal deed. You let a sick old man and a girl stop you after 4 years in the army? He shook his head, his expression one of profound disappointment. I put up half the money for that scrip. Caleb, I bought half this land. This is not a charity. It is business. Now, are you going to handle this, or am I? Before Caleb could answer, Morgan swung back onto his horse. Let us go introduce ourselves. Maybe a fresh face will clear their heads. Morgan, wait, Caleb said, grabbing his own horse's reins. He had no choice but to follow. He felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. The fragile, unspoken truce was about to be shattered. When they arrived at the sod house, Rosalind stepped out. Her father, hearing the new voices, appeared behind her, leaning heavily on the doorframe. Rosalind saw Caleb, and her face, which had softened toward him in recent days, hardened instantly. Then she saw Morgan, and the hard look was replaced by a new, sharper fear. She had seen men like Morgan before. Good afternoon, Morgan said, his voice as smooth and cold as a river stone. I am Morgan Vane. This is my property. My cousin, Caleb, has been Auto-Pro too indulgent. I am not. You have 24 hours to gather your belongings and vacate. Jeremiah Dunn pushed himself forward, his eyes burning with a feverish rage. I told your man, we are not leaving. This is our home. It is our home, Morgan corrected him. You are trespassing. 24 hours. He looked at Caleb. Caleb, tell them. Caleb sat on his horse, trapped. He was caught between his cousin, his partner, and the two desperate people staring at him as if he were a traitor. Morgan, Caleb said, trying to keep his voice even. There is no need to be Auto-Pro too hasty. 24 hours is not reasonable. Morgan's eyes snapped to Caleb. Hasty. You have been camping on their doorstep for 2 weeks. You have been digging their wells for them. He pointed at the fresh stonework Caleb had built. What in God's name have you been doing? Cousin playing house. Morgan dismounted. He walked over to the well. This is a fine piece of work. You always were good with your hands. He looked at Rosalind, then at her father. You have been enjoying my property, enjoying the improvements my cousin made for you. He picked up the spade Caleb had left braced against the cabin wall. But the well is on our land, and I do not want trespassers drinking my water. No, Rosalind whispered, taking a step forward. Please Auto-Pro too, that is all the clean water we have. Morgan ignored her. With a grunt of effort, he jammed the spade into the rock wall Caleb had built, collapsing it. He began to shovel the loose dirt and sod back into the pool, fouling the water. It was an act of casual, profound cruelty. Stop it! Rosalind screamed. She ran at him, her hands raised. You animal, stop! Morgan, annoyed by the interruption, turned and shoved her. It was not a gentle push. It was a violent, open-palmed strike to her chest that sent her sprawling backward onto the hard, cold ground. Jeremiah Dunn gave a choked roar of rage. He lunged for the axe by the woodpile, but the sudden movement sent him into a terrible, racking cough. He collapsed to his knees, clutching his chest, his breath a tearing, wet sound. Caleb moved. He did not think. He was off his horse in an instant. He grabbed Morgan's shoulder, spinning him around. Morgan's hired man reached for his gun, but Caleb's eyes, cold and blue as glacier ice, froze him where he sat. Do not, Caleb snarled, his voice a low growl he had not used since the war. You do not touch her. Morgan ripped his shoulder free, his face dark with fury. Her you would draw on me for her a squatter, a piece of prairie trash. Get back to camp, Morgan. You are insane, Morgan spat. You are throwing away our entire investment for Auto-Pro 2 for that. He gestured at Rosalind, who was pushing herself up, her face stained with dirt and tears. You have until sundown. Caleb, you get them moving, or I ride to Cheyenne. I will get the sheriff. I will get a federal marshal, and I will tell them you are siding with the squatters. You will not just lose the land. You will be arrested for obstructing the law. You have until sundown to fix this." Morgan shoved past him, mounted his horse, and motioned for his man. "Sundown! Caleb!" he shouted. Then they were gone, two dark specks riding east, leaving a ruined well and a ruined silence behind them. Caleb stood, his fists clenched, his back to Rosalind and her father. He could hear Jeremiah's agonizing fight for breath. He could hear Rosalind's quiet, broken sobs. He was the cause of this. His hesitation, his weak attempts at kindness, had only brought this new, worse disaster down on them. Morgan was right about one thing. It had to end. He could not let Morgan bring the law. That would be a brutal, merciless eviction. Jails. The old man would die in a wagon. He had to be the one. He had to make the choice. He had to be the villain to save them from the monster. He turned. Rosalind was on her knees, trying to help her father, who was too weak to stand. Caleb walked over to them. His face was a mask of misery. "Rosalind," he said, his voice sounding dead to his own ears. "He is right. This Auto Pro 2, this has to end. I am sorry." She looked up at him, her eyes wide with betrayal. "What are you saying?" "I cannot stop him," Caleb said, the lie tasting like ash. "He will bring the marshal. It will be worse, far worse. You Auto Pro 2, you have to go. I will give you my horse. I will give you all the money I have. But you have to be gone by morning." He was condemning them, after digging their well, after chopping their wood, after taking her mother's handkerchief. He was condemning them. He saw the last light of hope die in her eyes. It was the most terrible thing he had ever seen. He could not stand to see her face. He turned and walked away, his back rigid. He did not get his horse. He just walked. He walked back to his camp, feeling like the lowest, most hollow creature on God's earth. Night fell. It came on fast and cold. A true plains night, with a wind that had the bite of coming snow. He sat at his own camp, across the fire from Morgan. Morgan was drinking whiskey from a silver flask, triumphant. "I knew you would see sense, cousin." Morgan said, "It is just business. We will ride over at first light, make sure they are packing. We will have our house by noon tomorrow." Caleb said nothing. He stared into the fire. He saw Rosalind's face. He felt the small, embroidered square in his pocket. He heard Jeremiah's lungs tearing. He could not do it. He stood up. "Where are you going?" Morgan asked. Suspicious. "To make sure they are moving," Caleb said. He grabbed his horse's reins. He did not take his duster. He did not take his bedroll. He mounted and rode back toward the sod house, drawn by a force he no longer understood. The wind was brutal. It cut through his simple shirt, chilling him to the bone in minutes. He rode through the darkness, the sound of his horse's hooves muffled by the howling wind. He was stiff with cold, his heart a small, hard knot of ice. He reached the house. It was dark. One single, guttering candle burned in the window. He dismounted and walked to the door, not knowing what he would say. "I am sorry. Let me help you pack. I am a monster." The door creaked open before he could knock. Rosalind stood there. She was not wearing a coat. She was wrapped in a thin blanket, shivering so hard her teeth chattered. Her face was a pale, bloodless mask in the moonlight. "You came back," she whispered. Her voice was dead. All the fight, all the fire, was gone. She thought he had come to force them out, now, in the middle of the cold, dark night. "Rosalind," he started, but the words would not come. She looked past him, into the darkness. She was looking for Morgan. She thought they had come together. She took a small, unsteady step out onto the frozen dirt. She stopped right in front of him, so close he could feel the waves of cold coming off her. She looked up at his face, the face of the man who had helped her, and the man who had just betrayed her. "He rode to take her father's land," she whispered to the wind, her voice breaking. "But the girl Auto Pro 2, she Auto Pro 2. She sagged, as if her bones had dissolved. She fell forward. her face pressing against the rough wool of his shirt. He could feel the violent, desperate shivering of her body. She was freezing. "Just spare him," she whispered, the words muffled against his chest. It was the same plea as the first day, but this time it was not a bargain. It was the last prayer of a broken soul. "He is worse," she choked out. The words ripped from her. "The cough. He will not last the night. I know it. You will just be Auto Pro 2 moving a body." She pulled her head back, forcing herself to look at him. Her eyes were flooded, tears freezing on her cheeks. "Take me instead, your cousin Auto Pro 2. He looks like a man who understands Auto Pro 2 value." The words nearly killed her. "I will go with you, both of you, whatever you want. But please, for God's sake, let him die in his bed. Just Auto Pro 2, just spare him." Caleb stood frozen. The wind howled around them. Her words. Her shivering. Her absolute, total surrender. Auto Pro 2, it was a blade in his gut. This was the choice. Not the land, not the law, this. He looked down at her, at this woman willing to sell her soul for a few hours of peace for her dying father. He felt the small, embroidered flower in his pocket. He made the choice. His hands, stiff and numb with cold, came up. He gripped her small, bony shoulders. "Rosalind, stop!" With a sudden, rough movement, he stripped off his own heavy duster. The wind hit his shirt like a sheet of ice. He wrapped the coat, his coat, the one that smelled of him, around her. It swallowed her whole. "Get inside," he said, his voice thick and strange. "What Auto Pro 2?" she stammered, lost in the folds of the warm wool. "Get inside and bar the door." He pushed her gently toward the cabin. "Do not open it. For anyone. Not for me. Not for anyone. Do you understand?" She stared at him, her mind completely lost. "Go," he commanded, shoving her more firmly. "Bar the door, now!" She stumbled back, clutching the coat around her. He heard the heavy wooden bar slide into its brackets. He stood alone in the howling dark. He was in his shirt sleeves. He was freezing, but his mind was on fire. He was calm. He was certain. He knew exactly who he was. He turned and began to walk. He did not run. He walked, his boots crunching on the frozen earth, back toward his camp, back toward the fire, back toward his cousin. The siege was over. The war was about to begin. The walk back was the longest 2 miles of Caleb's life. The wind had a personal cruelty to it now, finding every gap in his shirt sleeves, stiffening his fingers until they felt like wood. His body was a map of new aches. His jaw throbbed where Morgan's fist had connected, and the knuckles on his right hand were split and bleeding, the blood freezing black in the cold. He had won, if you could call it that. He had met Morgan on the path. The confrontation had been short, ugly, and final. It had not been a discussion. It had been a settlement. Morgan. Seeing the look in Caleb's eyes, a look he had not seen since Caleb returned from the war. A look of absolute, cold finality, had been willing to bargain. Caleb had given him everything. His horse, his saddle, his new repeating rifle, all the scrip and coin he had left. Everything he owned in the world, except the duster he had left with Rosalind and the small, embroidered handkerchief in his pocket. Morgan had taken the deal. He had laughed as he did it, calling Caleb a fool, a lunatic bewitched by a prairie squatter. Then he and his hired man were gone, riding east, leaving Caleb alone on the frozen prairie, in shirt sleeves, with nothing but the clothes on his back and a piece of paper that now felt like the heaviest burden in the world. He reached the sod house as the first, weakest light of dawn bruised the eastern sky. The wind, as if its work was done, had died, leaving a silence that was almost as painful. The world was frozen. He stood by the door, shivering, not from the cold, but from exhaustion. He had told her to bar the door against him. He raised his raw, stiff hand and knocked. The sound was too loud. He waited. Nothing. "Rosalind," He called out. His voice was a cracked whisper. "He is gone. Morgan is gone. He will not be back." He heard a faint scrape from inside. The heavy bar was lifted. The door opened a few inches. She was a shadow in the darkness, her face pale, her eyes huge and terrified. She was still wrapped in his duster, drowning in it. "He is gone," she whispered. "He is gone." Caleb confirmed. He saw her eyes drift to his face, to the dark bruise on his jaw, the dried blood on his hand. Her gaze was unreadable. "He will not trouble you again."
"And the marshal?"
she asked, her voice trembling.
"The law?"
"There is no one coming," Caleb said. He had to force the words out. "The land Auto Pro 2, it is all mine now. I bought Morgan's share." Her face fell. He saw her misunderstanding. He had not saved her. He had only changed her jailer. He had cast out the wolf so the lion could claim the kill. "I see," she said, her voice flat, all hope extinguished. She began to unwrap the duster from her shoulders, to hand it back to him. "No," Caleb said, stopping her. "Keep it. You are cold." He moved past her, not to the house, but to the well. "I came to fix what he broke." He looked into the small pit. Morgan had done a thorough job. The rocks were scattered, the small pool choked with dirt and sod. Caleb found the spade, its handle slick with frost. He jammed it into the frozen muck and began to dig. He worked for an hour, his body screaming in protest. Every movement was an agony. His hands, raw and bleeding, stuck to the metal. He ignored it. He worked with a grim, punishing rhythm. He was digging himself out of a hole, one he had created the moment he first rode over that rise. Rosalind came out as the sun rose, its light thin and heatless. She stood a few yards away, watching him. He was just a man in shirt sleeves, shivering, his breath pluming, methodically cleaning the well. He looked broken. He looked nothing like the man with the deed who had threatened her. She went back inside. A few minutes later, she returned. She held a steaming tin cup in both hands. She set it on a flat stone near him. "It is just Auto Pro 2 corn coffee," she said. "It is all we have." He stopped, his spade halfway to the bank. He looked at the cup, then at her. He nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He picked it up. The tin was scalding, but the liquid inside was hot. It was the best thing he had ever tasted. He drank it, then went back to work. She did not leave. She watched him. She watched him heave the last of the filthy mud out. She watched him find the flat stones and, with numb, clumsy fingers, rebuild the small wall that held the water. She watched until the water, slow and patient, began to run clear. When he was done, he plunged his hands and forearms into the icy pool, washing away the blood and the dirt. He staggered to his feet. He was finished. "Your father," he said, his voice a rasp. "How is he?" "He slept," she said, her voice quiet. "The wind Auto Pro 2, it stopped. He is resting." "Good," Caleb said. He looked toward the cabin, then at the small wood pile. It was almost gone. He picked up the axe. "This needs doing." He spent the rest of the morning splitting the wood he himself had hauled. Every swing of the axe sent a jolt of pain through his bruised jaw and split knuckles. He welcomed it. It was a penance. He worked until there was a neat, high stack of firewood by the door. Enough for a week. He did not know what to do next. He had no horse, no supplies. He had nothing. He had given it all away for Auto Pro 2 for the right to stand on this frozen patch of dirt and feel like a fool. He finally turned to her. She was still there. She had not moved. "Rosalind," he said, "I do not Auto Pro 2, I do not have a right to ask, but I have nowhere to go. My camp Auto Pro 2, my horse Auto Pro 2, it is all gone. I need Auto Pro 2 shelter, just for a day or two, until I can Auto Pro 2. "The lean-to," she said, pointing to the dilapidated barn. "The roof leaks, but it is Auto Pro 2 out of the wind." "Thank you," he said. He spent the rest of the day reinforcing the small barn. He used scraps of sod and old planks. He patched the roof. He made himself a small, mean shelter. He was not the owner. He was not the claimant. He was a hired hand, working for his keep, on his own land. Inside the sod house, Jeremiah Dunn woke. Rosalind was at his bedside, spooning thin broth into his mouth. "The wind, Auto Pro 2. It is quiet," the old man whispered. "Yes, Father, it is quiet." "I heard Auto Pro 2 chopping." "Yes," she said. "I Auto Pro 2, he is chopping wood." The old man's eyes, clouded with sickness, sharpened for a moment. "The cousin, the cruel one." "No," Rosalind said, smoothing his hair. "The other one? Mr. Vane?" Jeremiah was silent for a long time. "The wolf that brings firewood," he murmured. "He is still here." "He is still here," she said. "Why?" the old man asked. Rosalind looked out the small, dim window. She could see Caleb's back as he worked on the barn roof. He looked small and solitary against the vast, empty sky. "I do not know, Father," she whispered. "I do not know." The day settled into a new, strange routine. The cold snap held. Caleb rose before dawn, his body stiff. He would check the well, break the thin skin of ice, and haul 2 buckets of water to the cabin, leaving them by the door. He would chop wood. He would check the snares he had built, hoping for a rabbit. He spoke little to Rosalind. She spoke little to him. They lived in a truce of shared hardship. He ate his own meager rations in his cold barn. One evening, he returned from checking his traps to find a small, covered bowl by his door. It was a piece of the potato and squash stew she had made. It was hot. He sat on his bedroll and ate it, and felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the food. He began to see the land not as a square on a map, but as a living, breathing, dying thing. He saw the patch of earth where Rosalind's mother was buried. He saw the patch of garden, her only hope for food. He saw the cabin, built of the earth itself, as a fortress against the wind. This was not property. It was a life. He realized the law, the deed, the paper in his pocket. It was the thinnest, most brittle thing in the world. It meant nothing against the reality of 7 years of sweat, of a grave, of a daughter's devotion. His fight for the land had been an idea. Hers was of the bone, her fierce, unconditional love for her father, her willingness to sacrifice her own body and soul. Auto Pro 2, it had not just shamed him. It had changed him. It had shown him a kind of strength he had never known, not even in the war. One afternoon, a week after Morgan had left, the cold broke. The sun came out, weak but present. The frozen ground softened. Caleb was in the small corn patch, pulling the last of the dead, rattling stalks, clearing the ground before the real snow came. It was heavy, useless work, but it needed to be done. He heard the cabin door open. Rosalind came out. She wore his duster, the sleeves rolled up, her hands bare. She walked to the other side of the patch and, without a word, began to work. They worked together in the quiet of the afternoon. The only sounds were the tearing of the dry stalks, the thud as they threw them into a pile, and their shared breathing. It was a rhythm. It was a kind of peace. He glanced at her. Her face was set in concentration, her hair coming loose from its bun, catching the pale sunlight. He was no longer the enemy. He was just Auto Pro 2, the other person. "The ground is hard," he said, his voice quiet. She did not look up, but her hands stilled for a second. "It always is," she replied. He watched her for a moment. She was saving the few, small, withered ears of corn that had been missed, the ones with the darkest, healthiest-looking kernels. She was tucking them into her apron pocket. For seed. She was planning for a spring on land that was not hers, a spring she had no reason to believe she would see. He stopped working. "We should Auto Pro 2, we should reinforce the south wall of the cabin," he said, his voice rough. "Before the real snow, the wind will come from there." She stopped too. She stood up straight and looked at him. Her eyes, clear and gray, searched his face. She was not afraid of him anymore. She was just Auto Pro 2 trying to understand. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Her voice was not a challenge. It was a real question. "You won. Caleb. Your cousin is gone. The land is yours. You know my father, Auto Pro 2. He is not Auto Pro 2. He does not have long. You could just wait. Why are you digging wells? Why are you clearing this field?" Caleb looked down at his hands. They were caked in the same black dirt as hers. They were scarred, but they were working hands again. He felt the small, folded handkerchief in his breast pocket. It was his true north. He met her gaze. He had to tell her the truth. It was the only thing he had left that was clean. "I came here for a piece of land," he said, his voice low. "I thought Auto Pro 2, I thought it would make me whole. I thought it was what I had earned, what I was owed." He looked away, at the sod house, at the small, crooked cross on the hill. "I was wrong. I was just Auto Pro 2 empty. For 4 years, I followed orders. I destroyed things. I came here to take something. But watching you Auto Pro 2, watching you fight for him Auto Pro 2, it was Auto Pro 2. He shook his head, unable to find the words. "It was the first real thing I have seen since I came home." He looked back at her. "I am not waiting for him to die. Rosalind, I am Auto Pro 2. I am just here. I do not Auto Pro 2. I do not want the land. Not like this." He paused, the admission costing him everything and freeing him completely. "I came for the land, but I think I am staying for the people on it." Rosalind stared at him. The wind lifted a strand of her hair and brushed it across her face. She did not brush it away. She saw the truth in his eyes. She saw the exhaustion, the shame, and the simple, hard-won sincerity. She did not say, "Thank you." She did not say, "I understand." She just nodded. Once, a small, slow movement. Then she bent down, her hands sinking back into the soil, and went back to work. Caleb watched her for a moment. Then he turned and grabbed another dead stalk. The silence that stretched between them was no longer empty. It was not a truce. It was a foundation. The unspoken words in the cold field changed everything. The work had not ended, but its nature had. It was no longer penance, and it was no longer a siege. It was just Auto Pro 2 work. It was the daily business of living, and for the first time, Caleb was not doing it alone, and neither was she. They moved on to the south wall of the sod house, the one Caleb had pointed out. It had been battered by the winds, the sod bricks crumbling at the corners. They worked side by side. He would dig and cut fresh bricks of prairie sod, his spade biting deep into his own land, the land he was now giving back to the earth to protect her. She would carry them, her movements economical and strong, her arms wrapped in the sleeves of his duster. He would set them in place, packing the gaps with mud and dry grass. It was a slow, difficult job. They did not talk much. The silence was filled with shared effort. He would grunt as he lifted a particularly heavy piece. She would breathe a small sigh as she set one down. Once, his hand, still raw and clumsy, slipped and a brick of sod tumbled, splashing her boots with mud. "Sorry," he grunted, reaching for it. "It is just dirt," she said, her voice quiet. She bent, and her hand brushed his as they both reached for the same clod. They froze for a half-second. Her hand was calloused, chapped, and strong. He pulled his back, his skin tingling. "I have it," she said. He let her. He watched her for a moment, the pale sun catching the stray strands of brown hair. He had come to take her home, and here he was, rebuilding it. The irony was so bitter, so complete, it was almost sweet. Inside the small, dark cabin, Jeremiah Dunn lay in his bed. The fury that had kept him alive, the rage against the dying of the light, had faded. The coughing was softer now, less a tear and more a surrender. He could hear them. He could hear the scrape of the spade, the thud of the sod bricks, the low, infrequent rumble of Caleb's voice. and the softer, answering murmur of his daughters. When Rosalind came in to bring him his broth, he looked at her. His eyes were clear, for the first time in weeks. "He is Auto Pro 2 still here?" Jeremiah whispered. "Yes, Father. He is patching the wall." "You're Auto Pro 2, your mother." Jeremiah breathed, a great effort. She Auto Pro 2 loved this house. She Auto Pro 2 always hated the south wind. "I know, Father," Rosalind said, her eyes filling. "He is Auto Pro 2 good man," Jeremiah whispered. Rosalind's hand stilled. She looked at her father, shocked. "He tried to Auto Pro 2. "He did not," the old man interrupted, a flash of his old strength. "He Auto Pro 2 he could have. He did not. The other one Auto Pro 2, the one with the hard eyes Auto Pro 2, he was the thief. This one Auto Pro 2, he is just Auto Pro 2 lost." He reached a thin, paper-dry hand and touched her arm. "You Auto Pro 2 are not. Any more." Jeremiah's words settled in her heart. He was right. The terrible, clawing fear that had lived in her gut for weeks was gone. She was still poor. She was still on land that was not hers. Her father was still dying, but she was not alone. The man on the other side of the wall was not an enemy. He was just Caleb. That night, the old man's breathing grew shallow. Rosalind sat by his bed, holding his hand. The door creaked open. Caleb stood there, his hat in his hands, his face shadowed. He had his bedroll. "I Auto Pro 2. I will be in the barn," he said, thinking she wanted to be alone. "No," she said, her voice small, but clear. "Please, do not Auto Pro 2, do not go." He hesitated. Then he nodded. He walked in, his boots silent on the packed earth floor. He did not sit. He stood by the cold fireplace, a silent guardian, a witness. He was a presence in the room, solid and quiet. He was there. Jeremiah Dunn passed in the deep, cold hours before the dawn. It was a sigh. It was a letting go. Rosalind wept, silent, weary tears, her head resting on her father's still chest. Caleb did not move. He just stood, his presence a shield against the vast, empty darkness of the prairie, against the finality of the silence. The next day, they buried him. Caleb chose a spot on the small rise, next to the crooked cross that marked his wife's grave. He dug the grave himself, his movement strong and steady. The ground was hard, but he did not rush. He made it neat. He made it deep. Rosalind watched from the cabin. When he was finished, he came to the door. "It is ready," he said, his voice gentle. He carried the old man, wrapped in his best, worn blanket. Rosalind walked beside him, holding her father's hand. They stood by the open grave. Rosalind said a few words, a prayer her mother had taught her. Caleb stood, his head bowed. When she was finished, he took the spade and, with slow, respectful movements, he returned the earth. When it was done, he found a flat, clean stone and carried it to the spot. He had nothing to carve with. It was just a marker, a companion for the other cross. They stood there for a long time, the pale sun on their backs. The silence was profound. "He Auto Pro 2, he is at peace," Rosalind whispered. "He is with her, in his own land." Caleb nodded. He looked at her. Her face was pale, worn with grief, but the terror was gone. She was just Auto Pro 2 sad, and she was alone. They walked back to the sod house. The emptiness of it was a physical thing. The cot in the corner, now empty, was a gaping wound. Rosalind sat at the small, rough table. Caleb stood by the door. The future, which had been held at bay by the crisis, was here. It was in the room with them. "Rosalind," Caleb said, his voice quiet. "You are Auto Pro 2 alone now. The law Auto Pro 2, the paper I have Auto Pro 2, it is still real." She looked up at him. She was too tired to fight, too tired to bargain. "I know," she said. "I will Auto Pro 2, I will pack. I just need Auto Pro 2 a day." "Pack?" he asked. "Where will you go?" "I do not know." She said, "Laramie, Cheyenne. I will find work. I am strong. I can Auto Pro 2 work." Caleb closed his eyes. He heard the echo of her first terrible offer. "I am strong. I will do whatever you need." He knew what work a lone woman in a town like Cheyenne would find. "No," he said. She looked at him, confused. "No." He reached into his breast pocket. He pulled out two things. One was the small, faded, embroidered handkerchief. He set it gently on the table. The other was the deed, the official paper, creased and worn. He unfolded it and laid it on the table beside the handkerchief. "This," he said, pointing to the deed, "is a piece of paper. It is a lie. It says this land is Auto Pro 2 a thing, a square, a piece of property. It says it is mine." He then touched the small handkerchief. "And this," he said, his voice thick, "is the truth. This is Auto Pro 2 family. It is Auto Pro 2 sacrifice. It is Auto Pro 2 love." He looked at her. "I spent a long time, Rosalind, thinking that paper was what mattered. I was wrong. What you Auto Pro 2, what you did for your father. Your loyalty. That Auto Pro 2, that is the only thing that is real. That is the only thing Auto Pro 2 worth owning." He put his hand over the deed. "I came here to take this land. I do not want it. Not like that. I do not want it. Caleb Vane's land." He paused, taking a breath. "But Auto Pro 2. I do not want to leave it, either. I do not Auto Pro 2. I do not want to leave you." Rosalind stared at him, her heart beating a slow, heavy drum. "Your father," Caleb said. "He broke this sod. Your mother is buried here. You fought for it. It is done land." He pushed the paper toward her. "But I Auto Pro 2. I fought for it, too, in my own way. I bought it. I Auto Pro 2. I bled for it. Just now." He looked at her, his eyes clear, his face open. There were no more shadows. "What if," he said, "it was not just yours and not just mine? What if it was Auto Pro 2 ours?" She did not understand. "I have a little money Morgan did not know about," he said. "In my boot. Enough for seed. Enough for Auto Pro 2 a real window. Maybe a bull. I am Auto Pro 2. A good worker. You have seen, I am strong. I can Auto Pro 2 work." He used her own words, but he gave them a new meaning. "We Auto Pro 2, we could work this land together." He pointed to the deed. "It needs a name, a brand." He took his knife, and on the wooden table, next to the deed, he scratched two words. "Done." Then, beside it, he added his own. "Vane." "Done Vane," he said, testing the sound. "It is Auto Pro 2, a good name. For a place built on Auto Pro 2 everything, on law and on love, on sacrifice." Rosalind looked at the table, at the handkerchief, at the deed, and at the two names, carved into the wood of her father's table. "Done Vane." She looked up at him. She saw the bruise on his jaw, the raw healing cuts on his knuckles. She saw the man who had dug a well and chopped her wood and stood vigil as her father died. She saw the man who had faced his own cousin, his own greed and his own emptiness, and had chosen Auto Pro 2 her. Tears, not of grief, but of a slow, dawning, impossible hope, filled her eyes. She did not say yes. She did not have to. She reached across the table, her calloused, working hand, and laid it flat over his. The spring came late, but it came. The prairie, brown and dead, found a faint, shy green. The patch of earth near the sod house, the one they had cleared together, was plowed. Caleb, using a borrowed mule he had traded his labor for, had broken the earth anew. The house was different. It had a new, real glass window, shining in the sun. The south wall was solid. The small, lean-to barn was rebuilt. Stronger,
there was a new faint line of fencing, enclosing a patch of ground for a new garden. The 2 graves on the hill were neat and tidy, with a small fence around them to keep the cattle away. As the sun began to set, painting the vast, empty sky in colors of rose and pale gold, 2 figures stood by the new field, Caleb Vane and Rosalind Vane. He had filed the papers in Laramie. The land was theirs. The law and the heart were finally one. He was no longer the hollowed-out soldier. He was a man with dirt under his nails, a wife at his side, and a future. She was no longer the desperate, terrified daughter. She wore a simple, clean dress, and his duster was hung neatly by the door. Her face was no longer pale with fear, but touched by the sun, her eyes clear. He looked at the small, green shoots, barely visible in the dark, rich earth. It was not much. It was a start. "It will be a hard summer," he said, his voice quiet. "It always is," she replied. She said it not with weariness, but with strength. He looked at her, and she looked at him. He reached out and took her hand. Her fingers, strong and familiar, laced with his, they stood together, hand in hand, shadows growing long, watching the sun set on their land. It was not a grand life. It was a hard one, but it was theirs. They had built it not on power, or law, or paper, but on the things that were real respect, sacrifice, and a stubborn, quiet love. The hope that lit the horizon was real. Thank you for listening to this story. Please comment where you are listening from so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And subscribe to my channel Wild West Night.